One of the more common complaints about certain types of stories points at the hero's lack of agency. It's like the story just kind of happens around the hero sometimes. It would be like if a person put a sack of flour with a smiley face on it in place of the main character, and then the story could go on without much of a change. Then we're talking about this type of tale. No action of the hero progresses any bit of the story at all. And if the hero actually does choose to do anything, it's either a stupid choice or is lost as someone else gives a better idea. The forward motion of the plot comes through either convenience contrived by the author or the actions of other characters. All the while, the hero is just dragged along with wide eyes, staring at everything going on around them. And, truth be told, the passage for this sermon, 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 1 to chapter 10 verse 16, can seem like it fits quite well in a fantasy version of this type of story. I mean, you have a young man and his ally sent out on a simple mission, just like every level 1 video game protagonist. Along the way, they meet a wizened mystic of a man, called a prophet or a seer, or for all intents and purposes carries the same presence that we would afford a wizard. And the young man is told that he'll become this powerful leader, which is proven by certain events happening on his way home. And all of this happens before he even chooses to accept his call to adventure. It's the beginning of 100 different stories we've heard before, all with a supposed hero who just goes along with the flow. We'll look at the story in more detail soon, but watch as we do and you will witness that young Saul's only proactive choice is to quit, which is promptly shut down by the servant at his side as he comes up with a better idea that actually progresses the story. It appears at first glance that we're about to embark on the beginning of a tale with an inactive hero. But there are 2 things that I want us to keep in mind as we work through this passage. 2 concepts to hold on to that lead us to the same point. First, while this chapter and a little bit are the beginning of Saul's story arc in the book, this is not the beginning of the story. It's important to remember that no matter which human shows the most screen time throughout the various arcs of this story, they are not the true heroes of the story being told. And this brings us to the second concept to keep in mind. God is the hero of this story. The entire book of Samuel, God is the hero. Sure, he shares the spotlight with the human leader through whom he works his plan to bring salvation to his people. But the hero of the story is always God. Remember, this whole story, both 1st and 2nd Samuel, carry this theme of, despite the problems of this life and the human evil that brings them about, God's king will reign and bring restoration to his humble people. No matter what goes on in our lives, God is active and progressing the story to restore us to a proper relationship with him, if we are humble enough to bow to his will. It might not always seem like it's true. We might feel like the exact opposite is actually happening. We might even have an attitude that we're just going through the motions of the drudgeries of life. But that does not mean that God is not working. He is the real hero of the story, and he is proactively progressing the story to good. And it doesn't require us to be perfect before he acts. Remember, in the last chapter, the leaders of the Israelites had callously pushed aside God's amazing leadership and asked Samuel to provide for them a king. They wanted someone they could push forward to fight their battles for them, someone they could control enough to do their bidding. And all of this was because Samuel had fallen into a similar trap as Eli, by elevating his wicked sons to levels of leadership. The whole situation had been a steep descent into less than godly circumstances. But God was still at work. He told Samuel to give the people a king. They'd get what they wanted, but it wouldn't work the way they wanted it to. It would be God's way, with the person he chose for his purpose. And this is when we get to the introduction of Saul, the tutorial fetch quest before the inciting incident of this story arc. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 to 5. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. And there was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward he was taller than any of the people. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish said to Saul his son, "Take one of the young men with you, and arise, go and look for the donkeys." And he passed through the hill country of Ephraim, and passed through the land of Shalisha, but they did not find them. And they passed through the land of Sha'alim, but they were not there. Then they passed through the land of Benjamin, but they did not find them. When they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys and become anxious about us." We've seen this type of introduction before, In order to get to the person taking the lead of the story arc, we first meet their father. It's very much akin to what we saw with Samuel's own intro and his father Elkanah. Only this background of Saul's father takes less time. Largely, we discover that he was a Benjamite with some level of influence. The phrase, a man of wealth, could also be translated, a mighty man of power. The exact direction to take is up for debate, but the basic idea is still the same. There was at least some positive reputation that Kish had. If we add to this Saul's statement later on in chapter 9, where he says that he's from the least of the 12 tribes and the least of the clans of that tribe, it makes me think of the phrase, a big fish in a small pond. This is the sense I get for Kish, the guy that everyone in town knew and thought well of, but most people outside of the town would have no reason to care about who he is. So there were some big shoes for Saul to fill, expectations for him to meet, at least in their town. But still, he likely would have remained in relative obscurity to history, if not for the active hero of this story choosing to work through him. We can even laugh at God's sense of humor in introducing Saul at this point in the chapters. In the end of chapter 8, the elders of Israel asked Samuel for a king, and just a mere few verses later, we're introduced to a man who would be the answer to their request. And what do we call him? Asked for. That's basically what the name Saul means. You asked? Well, I'll give you asked. In verse 2, we see that Saul had a few other things going for him as well. He was comparable to a cover model in handsomeness, and stood over a head taller than your average Israelite. Saul stood out in a crowd. He'd be one of the people that an outward-focused individual would think could do great things. But his place in life was still an average one. Like any other son who seeks to heed his father, Saul was sent on a sigh-inducing errand. I'm sure he'd rather have gone to Tashi Station to hang out with Biggs and Wedge instead of going to look for some droids, I mean donkeys. But because Kish told him to go, Saul did, and brought along one of the servants for the journey. The pair took a huge route, searching for the donkeys. Mile upon mile they trekked, but to no avail. Saul starts out the story in failure, which is kind of funny considering that our series A Song of Failures and Hope has tended to start off with arcs of the character's rising success. There will be that sense of hope in this first king of Israel, but it's not in his arc yet. No, here he not only fails in his simple quest, but he decides to quit. Let's go home before my father starts to worry about us. But this failure in a mundane task leads God to direct Saul toward the plan that God has for him, and it comes through the suggestion of the servant. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verses 6 to 13. But he said to him, Behold, there is a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor, and all that he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us the way we should go. Then Saul said to his servant, But if we go, what can we bring the man? For the bread in our sacks is gone, and there is no present to bring the man of God. What do we have? The servant of Saul answered again, Here, I have with me 1/4 of a shekel of silver, and I will give it to the man of God to tell us our way. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he said, Come, let us go to the seer, for today's prophet was formerly called a seer. And Saul said to his servant, Well said, come, let us go. So they went to the city where the man of God was. As they went up the hill to the city, they met young women coming out to draw water, and said to them, Is the seer here? They answered, He is. Behold, he is just ahead of you. Hurry, he has come just now to the city, because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him, before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat till he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately. So we have Saul ready to quit and go home. But the servant has an idea. Their journey has led them to one of the cities that the prophet Samuel regularly visited. It was likely Ramah, the place where Samuel's house rested, but the city isn't named. With just the sight of the city, the servant remembered the stories of the mighty judge and prophet of God, the man of God held in high honor, whose every word comes true. Remember, back in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 19, it said that God let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. If Samuel told you the word of God, you could be certain that it would come true. But with all of this fame and renown, it might make you wonder, why didn't Saul know this prophet too? Why didn't he make the suggestion to ask the prophet for wisdom and where to search for the donkeys? Well, this likely says more about Saul's understanding of the world than any lack or diminishment of Samuel's reputation. Saul wasn't raised in the traditions of leadership. No one taught him the who's who of political circles. He simply didn't know enough to recognize the significance. It's a good thing that Kish hadn't sent Saul alone. The unnamed sidekick was truly significant to the tale. And then we see Saul point out the flaw in the servant's plan, saying there wasn't even enough food for a return journey home. What could they ever give the seer as a gift for the information of the donkey's whereabouts? Well, it just so happened that the servant had 1/4 of a shekel of silver in his pocket, so they had something. And when we come to this point in the story, there are so many different directions that I want to point out here. So many different places that we can go and think about. So let's go in this particular order. First, I see Saul ask his question of what they could possibly give the seer. And as the servant pats his pockets, expecting to find nothing, he finds something buried deep in one of the pockets. He reaches down and he finds something metal, something valuable. And this leads us to the second thing. 1/4 of a shekel of silver would have been about a week's wages for the servant. Who is it that just happens to find a few $100s in their pocket that they forgot about? This is totally an act of God. God proactively progressing his story to his restorative end. We witness an active and providential God in this surprising find of a gift. If not for this accidental discovery, the rest of the story would never have happened. Saul would have gone home and, spoilers, discovered that the donkeys had been found. And he'd have gone on to live the rest of his mundane life. But that is not the way that it happened, because God is actively at work even when few see what he is doing. And the third thing to point out here, not only does the servant just happen to find a tiny fortune in his pocket, but also he freely gives the whole thing. He's a servant, unnamed in the story. He held no importance to the world as far as any human being at the time would believe. That money could have gone a long way for him. And Saul was his master's son. Saul held the inheritance for the wealth of Kish. No matter how few places that wealth could go in a bigger pond, it was still Saul's inheritance. He owned everything. At the very least, we could hope the servant asked his master's son to pay him back the money for saving that donkey invested wealth. But we don't see that. No, we see the servant freely give everything he has to help his wealthy master keep his wealth. This servant is a humble man, willing to give it all. No wonder God chose to work through this servant's suggestion. Finally convinced, Saul agrees to the servant's plan. They're going to see the wizard, seer, or prophet, whatever terminology you want to use. They're going to go find Samuel. As they reach the city's outer wall, they happen upon some young women headed for the water source while the shadows grew longer in the late afternoon, early evening sun. And they ask the women if the seer is currently in the city. And then we see another, it just so happens, in the story. By some strange coincidence, the seer was in the city, because it's a big festival today. And after the sacrifice, some of the important people of the city are going to gather with the prophet and partake of the food. They'll be waiting for him to arrive, and he's probably on his way there now. So if you hurry, you might just catch him. Ooh, the element of a ticking clock heightens the stakes. So Saul and his servant hasten to meet the seer, which of course we know they're going to. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verses 14 to 24. So they went up to the city. As they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming out toward them, on his way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord revealed to Samuel, "Tomorrow, about this time, I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people because their cry has come to me." When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, "Here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people." Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, "Tell me, where is the house of the seer?" Samuel answered Saul, "I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for today you shall eat with me. And in the morning I will let you go, and will tell you all that is on your mind. As for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for your father's house?" Saul answered, "Am I not a Benjamite, from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans in the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way?" Then Samuel took Saul and his young man and brought them into the hall, and gave them a place at the head of those who have been invited, who were about 30 persons. And Samuel said to the cook, "Bring the portion I gave you, of which I said to you, put it aside." So the cook took up the leg, and what was on it, and set it before Saul. And Samuel said, "See, what was kept is set before you. Eat, it was kept for you until the hour appointed, that you might eat with the guests." So Saul ate with Samuel that day. Rushing through the gate to find the seer, Saul and his servant noticed an old man strolling along. It just so happened to be Samuel. But the pair don't know that yet. And as a matter of fact, is not only an old man strolling along, it almost looks like the man was heading straight toward them. We get the narrator's break in the tale to tell us that God has been active in this situation. The day before, God had told Samuel that the king which the elders had asked for would be arriving the next day at just about this time, and Samuel should anoint this Benjamite as a leader of the people. And just when Saul came into Samuel's view, God tapped the prophet on the shoulder and said, "That's the man. That's the one through whom I will bring salvation of my people from the Philistines, the one I will use to perform my will, the one whom I will use to restrain the people from their wicked ways." God shows his care for the Israelites in verse 16. He had heard their outcry because of the Philistines' continued oppression. He might have chosen to work in a different way than the manner of judges, because he promised to work to the human king that they wanted. But God was about to empower this young Benjamite to perform this deliverance. God remains active. And back in Saul's perspective, we see him ask this strange wizard of a man where the seer might be. And Samuel chuckles with a smile on his lips. "I'm the seer." Notice that Samuel doesn't ask what this is all about. He doesn't need to because God has already told him everything. Instead, Samuel gives commands for Saul to follow. "Head up before me to the high place. Tonight we feast, and tomorrow I will explain everything. Oh, and if you're still concerned about your father's donkeys, don't be. They've already been found." I mean, Saul hadn't even had a chance to mention the donkeys. He went from trying to find the seer to then being invited to dine with him before there was even a chance to ask anything about his quest. The young man's mind had to be whirling right about now. What was going on? He was just trying to find some donkeys, and now he's being invited to a black tie event? As a guest of honor? This little fish just got thrown into a big pond. I wonder what odd noises came out of Saul's mouth at this moment. But finally, the sputtering became words. Humble words. Who am I to be considered desirable among the nation? I'm a Benjamite, the smallest tribe. And we know it was the smallest because not that many generations ago, as seen in the book of Judges, the whole tribe had nearly been wiped out. No one would ever expect a Benjamite to be anyone special. At least not special in a good way. And beyond that, the clan of that tribe, to which Saul belonged, was the smallest. Saul's father might be someone to know in his hometown, but here, in this city, among the leaders invited to this special gala? No, he was a nobody. Just a level 1 character on a quest to fetch some donkeys. But Samuel knew some of what God was doing here. So he led Saul to the feast, set him at the head of the table, and gave him a special set-aside portion. Probably the very portion that would have gone to Samuel under normal circumstances. But also notice the words. What has been set aside is set for you. Remember the last chapter, there was a kingship set aside, ready for the one that God would provide. And Saul is that man. Saul had no idea what was going on, no idea what was up. And it wouldn't be until the next day that Saul got the unbelievable answer to that question. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 25 to chapter 10, verse 8. And when they came down from the high place into the city, a bed was spread for Saul on the roof, and he laid down to sleep. Then at the break of dawn, Samuel called to Saul on the roof, "Up, that I may send you on your way." So Saul arose, and both he and Samuel went out onto the street. As they were going down in the outskirts of the city, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to pass on before us, and when he has passed on, stop here yourself for a while, that I may make known to you the word of God." Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, "Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies. And this shall be a sign to you that the Lord has anointed you to be prince over his heritage. When you depart from me today, you will meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zelzah. And they will say to you, 'The donkeys that you went to seek are found, and now your father has ceased to care about the donkeys and is anxious about you, saying, What shall I do about my son?' Then you shall go on from there further and come to the oak of Tabor. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there, one carrying 3 goats, another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a skin of wine. And they will greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you shall accept from their hand. After that you shall come to Gibeath Elohim, where there is a garrison of the Philistines. And there, as soon as you come to the city, you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place, with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre before them, prophesying. Then the Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man. Now when these signs meet you, do what your hand finds to do, for God is with you. Then go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I am coming to you to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait until I come to you, and will show you what to do." With his head still spinning, Saul went to Samuel's house. A rooftop room had been prepared for his visit, and he got what little sleep he could. When the next morning came, Samuel woke up Saul and his servant, and led the pair to the outskirts of the city, and had Saul tell his servant that he would catch up. Once the servant had been sent ahead, Samuel told Saul to wait, so that he could hear the words of God. A true statement that came from the very mouth of Yahweh for Saul. Then Samuel pulled out a vessel filled with fragrant olive oil, and had the tall young man kneel so that he could pour the oil over Saul's head. "Yahweh has anointed you as leader of the nation. You will reign over his people and deliver them from their surrounding enemies." And as proof that this would come to pass, Samuel gave very specific signs that would happen. And if this were just a story, instead of actual events of the proactive God, the prophecy would sound vast and nebulous. Things that could be misinterpreted or have a wide manner of meaning. It's how we constantly see prophecies in the stories that we tell. But here, Samuel's words are direct, straight to the point. They have specifics listed out that if even one of the numbers were off, the whole prophecy could be doubted. I mean, look at the verses. "There will be 2 men who will meet you by Rachel's tomb. They will let you know that your father's donkeys were found." That's a specific number of people in a specific location with a specific message. Nothing can be misinterpreted here. And that's not the only part of the prophecy. Samuel continues, "Then when you reach the oak of Tabor, there will be 3 men on their way to Bethel to worship God. One's going to have 3 goats, one's going to have 3 loaves of bread, and one's going to have a skin of wine. They'll all greet you and give you 2 of the loaves. Another specific location, another specific number of men, and each of them will have a specific number of items, a specific number of which they're going to share with Saul. And if that's not enough to prove the words of Samuel, here's another sign for you. When you get to the hill of God that has the Philistine garrison on it, you'll come to a band of men prophesying with various instruments. And when you meet them, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, Saul, and you will prophesy with them. It'll be like you're someone else entirely because this action is so unlike you. A third specific location with more specific people doing a specific task. And then the Holy Spirit himself will act to give Saul a specific action to do. He will prophesy unlike he's ever done before. Remember, I said at the beginning of this series that each character's arc we see in this book starts with the new character performing a similar action to the one whose story arc precedes theirs. Eli was a judge and priest. Samuel was a judge and was raised like a priest, and he became a prophet. Now, Saul would prophesy only to become a king. This is the passing of the baton from the previous leader's decline to the new rising hope of the next arc's lead. None of these events could Samuel hoax into happening, especially the coming of the Spirit onto Saul. There are just too many exact numbers and places and people. The odds of all of this happening by coincidence, by mere chance, by it just so happens, is beyond measure. It's only because we have the proactive God guiding the events to his will that these events could happen at all. Yahweh is active even when few see it. Samuel continues after giving these signs by saying that after them, Saul should set his hand to do what is obvious at the time. But by a week later, he should head to Gilgal to wait for Samuel. The prophet would make things even more clear to Saul then. There was no doubt for Saul, because everything occurred exactly as Samuel told him. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 9 to 16. When he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. And all these signs came to pass that day. When they came to Gibeah, behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God rushed upon him, and he prophesied among them. And when all who knew him previously saw how he prophesied with the prophets, the people said to one another, "What has come over the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" And a man of the place answered, "And who is their father?" Therefore it became a proverb, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" When he had finished prophesying, he came to the high place. Saul's uncle said to him and to his servant, "Where did you go?" And he said, "To seek the donkeys. And when we saw that they were not to be found, we went to Samuel." And Saul's uncle said, "Please tell me what Samuel said to you." And Saul said to his uncle, "He told us plainly that the donkeys had been found. But about the matter of the kingdom of which Samuel had spoken, he did not tell him anything." Saul had left Samuel, his heart ready to do the will of God, though we can see that some doubts remained in Saul's mind. Not doubts that the signs would come to pass, because they did, exactly as Samuel had said, but doubts that God could truly use Saul in this leadership role. The story skips over 2 of the 3 encounters because there's no need to repeat exact details. But something strange happened at the third event. something that kept in line with Samuel's words, but birthed the beginning of Saul's rise. When Saul prophesied, people who knew him questioned how this could be. It was like he was a totally different man. So much so that people created a proverb that day about truly surprising things. Is Saul also among the prophets? It'd be like us saying, wow, that pig really is flying. In reaction to this, a nameless man in verse 12 reminds them, and us in the audience, that this is not the chosen action of Saul, but the act of God. This man asks, who is their father? Basically, what's the source of this event? It all comes from God. He's the one who's in control here, the one acting, the one bringing about these great events so that he can bring about his work. This is all God. After the prophesying had ceased, Saul returned home, only to find his uncle staring in disbelief. What happened to the two of you? Where'd you go? It kind of reminds us of Eli's question to Samuel on the night that God had called his prophet to his mission. What did God tell you? Only Saul did not tell his uncle everything. Merely that they'd gone to find the donkeys, went to Samuel to ask, and were told that the donkeys had been found. Why did Saul not tell everything? Were the doubts still so loud in his head? Was he fearful of what would happen if he said that God had chosen him to be the first king of Israel? Or was it something else? We don't really know his motivations, but it is true that he did not mention any of this to his uncle. And we'll see in the next sermon that Saul is still hesitant to take on this role. But we'll discuss that more when we get to that sermon. For now, we must look at this passage and ask how to apply it to our lives. It's important for us to remember that we shouldn't think that we can just sit around doing nothing until God acts in our lives. The inactivity of Saul and his thoughts to quit even in a small task should never be our direction to head. But there is something for us to remember near there. God is the hero of the story, not us. He directs the course of events. And even when it seems like he's doing nothing at all, his providence is always directing us toward the restoration he wants to bring to his humble people. Yahweh is actively at work, even when few see what it is that he's doing. Even in the mundanity of life, when we're on a sigh-inducing quest, repeating the same old fetch quest, tired of this mind-numbing sameness of our days, God is still at work. And maybe we should look at the just-so-happened aspects of our life to witness his fingerprints. Those moments that seem too coincidental to deny his presence and power. But it's not just about these whirlwind moments, like being led into special places and given titles. God often works in our lives in the quiet ways as well. That little nudge to do something small, seemingly insignificant. The voice of a friend giving us advice. The change of heart that we can never explain to another. Big or small, God is at work. And as the hero of the tale, he will succeed. So let's go along with him. Let him lead us to the story bits that bring restoration to his humble people. Look to him. Expect him to work, even when he seems unmoving, because our God is no inactive hero. He is at work, and our calling is to humbly bow and do as he commands. And when we do, we will find ourselves in the midst of an amazing story. I know there are some listening who doubt these words, or who want to believe them but don't see it happening. I know this because I myself am in that latter category. Right before I sat down to write these words, the very same morning I wrote them, doubts and questions about the ability of God to work in my own life struck. Depression hit hard. I shook my head at myself when I remembered what I had to write, to preach. The words I speak are supposed to affect me first, so that I can unhypocritically speak the truth of God and call us to act according to his will. But I did feel like a hypocrite for most of the beginning of this sermon. I wasn't sure how to apply this passage, how to land the plane. How could I apply it if I didn't understand how it worked? If I hadn't lived it before I preached it? And truth be told, I still don't have a clear view of that answer. But as I wrote, I realized that continuing on with the actions of life, doing what I know to be good and godly, is all that's really asked of me, of us. God is the hero. He's the one actively moving, and calling us when he's ready to share with us what it is that he is doing. If it is few that actually see what it is he's doing, then what makes me feel like I have to be among those special few who know exactly what it is that he's doing? I mean, even Samuel didn't understand everything God was going to do through Saul. What makes me assume that I'm privileged to 100% knowledge of God's work? So, I'm called to believe, knowing that God is at work, and continue on in his ways the best that I can, even if it's drudgery or unwanted. And so are we all called. Does that make it easier for us to continue forward? Does it silence the doubts? No. But that does not keep God from moving, from acting, from bringing restoration to his humble people. It leads us to the humility that God's people are called to. We're not the ones in control. We're not the hero of the tale. The story does not move by our proactivity. And when we realize that, we might just start to witness the restoration that he can work through our humble lives.